The meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning, and I had been in that conference room hundreds of times over 27 years, and I knew every scratch on the table and every view from every window and the specific quality of the light at 9 in the morning, in October, when the sun came through the east windows at the angle that always made me think of the first morning I had walked into that building at 31 years old with a briefcase that contained a resume and 4 years of experience, and the specific determination of a person who had decided that this was where she was going to build something. They were seated when I arrived. My successor, a man named Craig who was 38 and had been with the company for 6 years and who I had mentored for 3 of those years because I had believed in his potential and had invested in it with the same attention I brought to everything. The HR director, the division head, they had the expressions of people who have rehearsed a conversation and who are managing the gap between the rehearsed version and the reality of the person sitting across from them. The division head said, "Margaret, we want to start by saying how much we value everything you have contributed." I had been in enough of these meetings on the other side of the table to know exactly what that sentence was the beginning of. I put my hands flat on the table. I looked at all 3 of them. I said, "Tell me what you have decided." The division head said they had decided to move in a new direction with the leadership structure and that my role was being eliminated and that the company was grateful for my 27 years of service. I said, "I see." I picked up my pen. I wrote 2 words on the legal pad in front of me. I underlined them both. Then I looked up and I said, "I want to discuss my transition agreement. My name is Margaret Osai. I am 61 years old. I was born in Accra, Ghana, came to the United States at 22 for graduate school in organizational management, and stayed because the work I found here was the work I had trained for, and because staying felt like the right decision, and because decisions that feel right at 22 sometimes turn out to be exactly right for reasons you cannot fully appreciate until you are 61. I spent 27 years at Aldridge Systems, a mid-sized technology services company that grew during my tenure from approximately 80 employees to 412, and from regional to national operations, growth that I am not claiming sole credit for because organizations grow through the combined effort of everyone in them, and because claiming sole credit is both inaccurate and unbecoming. I am claiming appropriate credit, which is the credit that the documentation supports, which is significant. I had been the chief operating officer for the last 9 years of my 27. I had built the operational infrastructure that the company ran on. I had managed the processes and the people and the systems and the client relationships that produced the organization that Craig was being positioned to lead. I had done all of it with the specific competence of someone who understood that the most important work is often the work that is least visible, and who had made peace with that invisibility as a professional reality, without fully understanding what the invisibility would cost when the people who had benefited from it decided they had moved on from needing it. I want to describe the 27 years in the terms that matter because they are the foundation of everything that follows. I joined Aldridge at 31 as a senior operations manager. I was promoted to Director of Operations at 36 after restructuring the client onboarding process in a way that reduced onboarding time by 40% and increased client retention in the first year by 22%. Both figures were documented and both were presented in the board's annual report in the year the restructuring was completed. My name was in the footnotes. The division head received the credit in the body of the report. I noted this and I filed it and I continued. I was promoted to VP of Operations at 42 after managing the company's expansion into 3 new markets, a process that required 18 months of the most complex operational coordination I had undertaken to that point, and that succeeded at a level that the company's external auditors described as exemplary. The VP title was accompanied by a compensation adjustment that was appropriate and a public acknowledgement that was adequate and a private understanding that I had been the primary architect of something significant. I was appointed COO at 52 after the previous COO retired, and after a search process that I was told later had produced several external candidates and had concluded with the board's determination that the most qualified candidate was the person who had been building the operation from inside for 21 years. I served as COO for 9 years. I will describe those 9 years in the summary terms that the transition meeting had tried to reduce to a sentence of gratitude. I grew the company's operational efficiency by 31% over 9 years. I managed 4 significant technology transitions with 0 major service disruptions. I built a management team of 42 people, the majority of whom I had identified, hired, and developed. I established the vendor relationship framework that reduced procurement costs by 18%. and I mentored Craig, who was now sitting in the conference room with the expression of a man who was not fully comfortable with the role he was playing in the meeting. The two words I had written on the legal pad were transition agreement, and I had underlined them because they were the frame within which everything I was about to do was going to happen, and because I wanted everyone in the room to understand that this was where the conversation was going regardless of what they had planned for it. I had prepared for this meeting, not because I had known it was coming, I had not known with certainty, but because I had known it was possible, and because preparation for possible outcomes is how I had operated for 27 years, and I was not going to stop because the possible outcome was personal rather than professional. 3 months earlier, I had engaged an employment attorney named Franklin Webb who specialized in executive transitions, and who had reviewed my employment agreement and my compensation structure, and the company's documented policies and my performance record, and the specific circumstances of Craig's appointment in the months preceding the meeting. Franklin had told me after 3 weeks of review that I was in a stronger position than the company's HR director was going to suggest in that meeting, and that the transition agreement I was entitled to was larger than the standard package they were going to offer, and that the difference between the standard package and what I was entitled to was worth fighting for. I told Franklin I intended to fight for it with the same thoroughness I had brought to everything at Aldridge for 27 years. He said, "Good, then let's make sure you have everything documented before you walk into that room." Franklin and I spent 6 weeks assembling the documentation that went into the negotiation. The operational improvements I had driven and their measured outcomes, each one cited with the date of implementation and the measured result. The management team members I had identified and developed, each one with their hire date and current position and the documented connection to my mentorship and development. The vendor framework and its documented cost savings. The technology transitions and their documented outcomes. The 9 years of COO performance reviews, all of which had been positive and all of which I had retained copies of. And a specific analysis of the relationship between the operational infrastructure I had built and the company's ability to function at its current scale, an analysis that addressed directly the question of what would happen to specific operational functions if the institutional knowledge I carried was not properly transferred. This last analysis was the most significant piece of the documentation because it addressed the question that the company had not yet asked, which was what they were actually losing when they eliminated my role and how long it would take to replace it and at what cost. Franklin called it the dependency analysis. The dependency analysis was 17 pages and it was specific and it was accurate, and when I placed it on the conference table in the second meeting with the division head and the HR director and Franklin beside me, the HR director read the first 3 pages and asked for a recess. The recess lasted 40 minutes. When they came back, they had a different number. Craig asked to speak with me privately 2 days after the transition agreement was finalized. I agreed because Craig was not the author of what had happened. He was a participant in a decision that had been made above him, and because I had mentored him for 3 years and I was not going to let the circumstances of my departure define the end of that relationship. We met at a coffee shop near the office. He was visibly uncomfortable in the specific way of a man who has benefited from something and who knows the benefit was not entirely clean. He said, "Margaret, I want you to know I didn't ask for this to happen the way it happened." I said, "I know." He said, "The way it was handled was wrong." I said, "Yes, it was." He said, "I have been thinking about the dependency analysis." I said, "Good." He said, "There are things in there that I don't know how to do." I said, "I know. That is why I documented them." He said, "Will you consult?" I looked at him for a moment. I said, "Franklin is going to send you a consulting agreement. Review it with your attorney. If the terms work for both parties, then yes." He said, "What are the terms?" I said, "My rate, my schedule, my scope. I decide what I am available for and when." He said, "That is fair." I said, "Yes, it is." We finished our coffee. He said, "I learned more from you than from anyone else in my career." I said, "I know, use it well." He said he would. I believed him. Not because he had always been trustworthy, but because the conversation we had just had was the most honest he had been with me since his first year at the company, and honest people, given the right circumstance, tend to grow into the honesty rather than away from it. The consulting agreement Franklin sent to Craig was accepted with 2 minor modifications that Franklin negotiated in a single call. I began consulting for Aldridge at my own rate and on my own schedule 4 months after the transition meeting. The dependency analysis had identified 7 specific operational functions that required my institutional knowledge to transfer correctly, and the consulting engagement addressed all 7 over an 18-month period. I also, in the same period, took on 2 additional consulting clients, both mid-sized technology services companies referred through my professional network, who needed the specific kind of operational expertise I had spent 27 years developing. The 3 consulting engagements combined produced in their first year an income that exceeded my COO salary by approximately 30%. I worked from my home office. I set my own schedule. I attended no meetings that I did not choose to attend. I made no decisions in service of priorities that were not my own. I built in 18 months the consulting practice that 27 years of organizational work had been preparing me to build, and that the elimination of my role had, in the specific way that forced transitions sometimes produce their own opportunities, given me the occasion to actually build. Franklin said at our year-end review meeting, "Margaret, the transition agreement was the beginning. The consulting practice is the outcome." I said, "The dependency analysis was the beginning. Everything else was its consequence." He said, "You knew they needed you." I said, "I always knew, I just needed them to know it too." I want to say something directly about what 27 years of building something for an organization and the manner of leaving it taught me, because the teaching is the part of this story that is most transferable to the people watching it. The first thing it taught me was that institutional knowledge is an asset that organizations chronically undervalue until it is no longer available to them, and that the people who carry institutional knowledge are almost always in a stronger position than they believe themselves to be if they have documented what they know and can articulate its value in specific terms. The dependency analysis was not a sophisticated document. It was a specific and honest accounting of what I knew and what the organization depended on my knowing and what it would cost to replace. Every person who has spent significant time in an organization has a version of that document inside them. Most people never write it down. Write it down. The second thing it taught me was that the people who say they no longer need you almost always discover that they were wrong about that, and that the discovery happens at a speed and a cost that is determined by how well you documented what you knew before you left. I had documented well, the discovery happened quickly. The cost to them was the consulting rate. The benefit to me was the rate and the schedule and the scope and the specific satisfaction of providing what was needed on terms that I set. The third thing it taught me was that 27 years of building something that is genuinely excellent is preparation for building something that is yours. I was 61 years old when I started the consulting practice. It is the best professional work I have done, not despite the 27 years, but because of them. My name is Margaret Osai. I am 61 years old. I came from Accra at 22 and spent 27 years building an operation for a company that grew to 412 people on the infrastructure I designed and maintained and refined. They sat me down in a conference room and told me they were moving in a new direction. I put my hands flat on the table. I wrote 2 words on a legal pad. I discussed the transition agreement. I placed a 17-page dependency analysis on the table in the second meeting. The HR director asked for a recess that lasted 40 minutes. The number changed. The consulting agreement followed. The consulting practice produced 30% more than the salary in its first year. I set my own schedule. I attend only the meetings I choose. I gave them my entire life for 27 years. They said they no longer needed me. Then the dependency analysis showed them in 17 specific and documented pages exactly why they did, and then I charged them my rate. That is the complete accounting. It is the right one. Every word of it was earned. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from. Subscribe if you have not already. There is always more to come.